Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you for joining today's webinar hosted by the Sikh Research Institute. Today's class is a part of the live series Love and Justice through Guru Nanak Sahib. This class, as always, will begin with a 40-minute lecture followed by 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A. So please drop your questions in the chat box and be sure to include your name and city. Now, I would like to introduce you to our instructor, who I'm sure many, if not all of you, are familiar with. Asha Marie Gore is a research assistant with Sikhi. She is a BA in Political Science and International Studies from Northwestern University. Her work at Sikhi is tied to her love of the Persian language and the ways it connects Iran, Afghanistan, Central Asia, and the Indian subcontinent. Please welcome Asha.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to the 10th session of Love and Justice through Guru Nanak Sahib. Thank you for attending all these sessions. We're nearing the end, which does make me a little sad, but thank you for being a part of this and sticking it out for quite some time this summer. So today's session is going to be about gender. We're going to talk about Guru Nanak Sahib's teachings on gender, what he revealed and said about women, but also gender as a whole. And we're going to talk about kind of larger themes related to gender and the feminine and masculine in Gurbani as well. So I'm going to begin not with the Sabad that was in the handouts, but with the Sabad that is most often cited when people are looking for what the Sikh stance on gender or women is. This also can be found in Asa Kivar, as well as the Sabad that was in the handouts for today's session. So Asa Kivar, for people who don't know, is a part of the morning congregational recitation. So if you're going to a Gurdwara in the morning, these 40s by Guru Nanak Sahib are recited. So it's very important. This means that very powerful and rich revelations about gender and women are central to devotional practice in the Sikh faith. So they cannot be overlooked or forgotten. So this is what most often comes up. If you go on Wikipedia or a basic Google search, or you look at an interfaith website, this is probably the Bani that's going to be cited when talking about what a Sikh stance on women or gender is. So from a woman, one takes birth. From a woman, one is formed. With a woman is betrothal and marriage. From a woman occurs friendship with others. And then from a woman is carried on the process of the world. When the first woman dies, the second woman is sought. Only with a woman is the foundation of a disciplined household life laid. Then why call her bad, from whom even kings are born? From a woman alone, woman is born. Without a woman, no one is born in this world. Nanak, only that true one is existing without a woman. The mouth with which Ikonkar is always praised, that face is adorned with 4 grains of fortune. Nanak, only those who praise Ikonkar are of radiant faces in that true court. So this is, powerful. This is from Guru Nanak Sahib. However, I think that there are ways that interpretations or extrapolations from this Shabad can be a little limiting sometimes. I think that the line that's focused on the most is, then why call her bad, from whom even kings are born? And I think that there's actually kind of a deeper subtext to the notion of coming from a woman that we're going to get into that has to do with dismantling notions of impurity. So we're going to focus a lot on that in this session. And I also want to acknowledge that here Guru Nanak Sahib is responding to the hypocrisies of society by pointing out, you have this dependence on women, yet you denigrate them. So this is calling out, this is what Guru Nanak Sahib, as we've seen in this course, does. Points out fallacies and hypocrisies and inconsistencies such that people's own arguments collapse on themselves. Now, this is a reflection. It's not necessarily commandments. That one does not necessarily live, say, marriage is held in high esteem in Sikhi, but there's no command that if you're a man and you don't marry a woman, something bad is going to happen to you, you're doing something wrong. Again, this is a reflection on a thing that is existing in society to call out the inconsistencies. You make this argument and it's wrong because you have these dependencies on women. And also, when Guru Nanak Sahib says only the one lives without a woman, this ties to the principle that only ek onkar is self-evident. The rest of us are, we're interdependent. It's only the culmination of all of us that is truly Khud, is truly self-evident. And that's where the Persian word Khuda comes from as well. So this isn't to say that, we're human beings, so we have attachments to women, and the more divine element, ik onkar, is more divine by virtue of not being associated with women. That's not what's being said here. It's that we are dependent on this group of people, on the feminine. And I think a beautiful way to describe this is that women are the thread that holds together society. So you can't denigrate the thread that has upheld everything you hold near and dear to you since, forever, since the beginnings of society. So it's not to say that, we're like, and also intended audience. So here we can see that the intended audience is, men of the era. That's not just, and similarly, we've seen in this course that there are times where Guru Nanak Sahib's intended audience is a Muslim audience of the era, or a Hindu audience of the era, or the Brahmins that are, need to question their power and their role in oppression and discrimination. So, or the Qazi, who is perhaps taking advantage in society as well. So again, this is an intended audience, is the men who derive their power from women, yet denigrate the source of that power. But that's not to say that always, that it would be very wrong to say that the intended audience is always men. There's, just like it would be wrong to say the intended audience is XYZ group of any sort. Gurbani is open to all, and even if you are someone who is a woman engaging with this Gurbani, you gain something from this as well. But there's a particular message to call out the inconsistencies held by a certain group that is wielding a certain type of power. It's not meant to be, we're just going to have conversations among men and women are an afterthought. No, this is the particular audience and lens in which this Sabad was revealed. So now I want to move into the kind of subtext when it comes to discussing how strange it is in society that there is a taboo around physically coming from a woman. And there's there's references here that may not be totally clear in our society today. I always like to give people visuals to engage with and ponder. This is a beautiful painting by Arpana Kaur called Stepping Out, which in my personal interpretation represents a woman stepping out from the confines of society. And it makes, in my opinion, reference to the flawed notions of purity and impurity that society imposed on women of that era and still do today on women of this era. So here we start with lines from the Sabad that was assigned for today's class, which is centered around the notion of sutak. So the notion of sutak is impurity or pollution, something that physically corrupts. And the context here is that sutak was seen to be an inherent part of womanhood because a woman's menstrual cycle would be considered impure and polluting, as well as the 40 days upon giving birth. So Guru Nanak Sahib, again, goes to the root of an argument to look at its inconsistencies, the things that don't add up. That way, the argument dismantles itself. So Guru Nanak Sahib said, okay, here we have two things going on. One, are you guys really worried about purity and impurity? Because if we're thinking about anything that could be impure, you're kind of going to be fighting a constant battle everywhere you go. You know, there's no limit to fears about impurity. So this pollution, this sutak, if we accept it, can be contracted everywhere. This is pre-germ theory, but we have to remember this. So that's why we're talking about these things and not necessarily germs. Cow dung and firewood used to create the purifying fire breed insects. So there's bugs in everything. This is a fact that remains true today that terrifies me. All our food does have bugs in it. Yet, this origin, this cow dung and firewood that's used as the fuel to create fire, which gives us life-serving, it's a life-serving attribute. You know, fire is something we need, and it's considered purifying in South Asian tradition. So how is it that the origin, the fuel for it, is impure, yet it produces this purifying element, and we don't worry about the fire being impure? Not one grain of corn is without organisms. Again, terrifying but true fact. There are bugs in all our food. And then we're talking about origins again, because menstrual blood is the origin of life. So water is the life by which everything is green. So we're not, how can you say the origin of something, the thing that we need to live, is impure? Does that mean that we're all impure because we come out of this origin? How can pollution be contained when it has already entered the kitchen? So what is this game you're playing? Why are you running around trying to say women are impure, and you're going to create all these rules and divisions and regulations? And, you know, really this is just a strategy of power and control. So yeah, in Guru Nanak Sahib's era, the sutak became the foundation, the justification for an entire system of oppression. Only upper caste men were considered pure, because again, we talked about in the caste session that untouchability rendered those without caste status physically impure, physically corrupting in a very similar fashion. So only upper caste men were considered pure. This is a prejudice that continues to thrive in many societies worldwide, even today, where women are cast away during their menstruation period. Anything they touch can be corrupting. Likewise, people that are rendered untouchable are seen as corrupting anything they touch or interact with. In Nepal, it's very common for women to be sent to these huts that, you know, have no running water and no light, to be all alone during their period of menstruation. Some see women as vessels of impurity, especially during the time of their menstrual period and for the 40 days after a child is born. The fluids at birth are considered pollution that could corrupt those who came in contact with them. Women are kept out of temples and away from food sources during the menstrual periods and after childbirth. The Guru spoke on how these practices violated the Ik Onkar principle. So again, when you're constructing a Sikh stance, always comes back to the Ik Onkar principle. The origins of life, menstruation, the womb, and the process of birth were impure. Then the life of the baby, the child, and all people would be impure as well. The Guru reunited society with oneness, asserting the divine qualities of nature, and therefore, every natural process is pure, and no person is inferior. So this is very powerful. Guru Nanak Sahib is not simply saying, you know, I disagree with you on your stance on women. Women should be uplifted. I mean, that is obviously an important stance, but he's going deeper than that and further than that and saying, I'm going to attack the very root of this problem, but simply by calling out its inconsistencies such that the so-called logic dismantles itself. And what blooms is the Ik Onkar paradigm. What flourishes in its place is the Ik Onkar paradigm. And naturally speaking, this means that the status of women is affirmed. The status of women is affirmed. Guru Nanak Sahib is interested in revealing what is true, what is an eternal principle that does not change whether or not people choose to engage with it. The truth is that no person is inferior. The truth is that no person is impure. The truth is that women are just as divine as any other person. And so Guru Nanak Sahib simply reveals and affirms this truth. So this is, in my opinion, more powerful than saying, oh, I'm liberating, I'm saving women. He's saying, no, women don't need to be liberated and saved. We need to change our so-called logic that is a falsehood, that does not stand up to the Ik Onkar paradigm. It needs to fall. It needs to be dismantled. So that's the work that needs to be done. We need to dismantle the prejudices and systems and so-called logics of oppression in our society. And then the truth can stand on its own. And that truth is that women are just as divine as men. Likewise, this is the exact process that we discussed in a session about caste and dismantling notions of untouchability. So we've talked about the foundation of Guru Nanak Sahib's teachings, and so Guru Nanak Sahib didn't just reveal his reflection on the status of women. He lived them out as well. Women have been integral to the foundation and continuation of the Sikh faith from the very beginning. Bibi Nanki was the first Sikh, and she was a woman. And in all of his journeys, Guru Nanak Sahib interacted with women of all sorts, from royalty to domestic servants to women that were seen to be involved in sort of black magic practices, women that were outcasted from society, women that were highly esteemed in society. So there was no discrimination within the types of women that Guru Nanak Sahib actively engaged with, and then they became the principal foundational actors for the faith as well. So here we begin with some lines from Bhai Gurdas. And remember, Bhai Gurdas, his writings are seen as the verifiable key to the Guru Granth Sahib. They are a secondary Sikh source that is also considered to be Bani. So in wisdom and virtues of the world being the spiritual, the other half of the body, the feminine, is the door to liberation. Being Guru-oriented, the woman certainly relishes bliss. Now, I really, really like this because This line isn't saying, we presume, when I say we, one would say presumably men, need to go liberate women. No, Biker Law says that the other half of the body, the feminine, is the door to liberation. So it's actually those who confine their actions and their thoughts with the rigidity of patriarchy are the ones that need to liberate themselves through the door of the feminine. And he affirms, just like Guru Nanak Sahib did, that women are just as divine as men, and also that accessing the feminine is a blissful state. And this is very powerful. I mean, a lot of religious statements of that era, the preceding era, and the following era make the feminine out to be something taboo or corrupting or dangerous or needing to be controlled or lesser or inferior, dangerous. No, but here, the woman certainly relishes bliss. Is there still a call to be guru-oriented? Is there still this question of how one orients themselves? Yeah. All people have this task at hand, which is to constantly be chiseling the path to the divine, making intentional choices towards their orientation. But there's nothing lesser, or in the woman's case, there's nothing more she has to overcome. There's this other idea, in a lot of religions that women have more to overcome because there's something inherently wrong with being a woman. None of that here. In fact, the feminine is the door to liberation. So yes, in Guru Nanak Sahib's life, it was women who were among the first to accept and uphold the teachings of Gurbani. And as the light of Nanak passed from the first Guru to the 10th, women were pillars and leaders in the Sikh faith. Bibi Dalta, the midwife, and Bibi Nanki, the Guru's sister, were the first people to notice the light within the Guru. The Guru's wife, Mata Sulakshmi, facilitated Sangat, or congregation, sang Sabad, divine word, through Kirtan, which is the singing of divine praise, the actual music, and held langar, food distribution, while her husband traveled throughout the larger continent. Upon meeting the Guru and hearing Sabad, Noor Shah, a queen known for practicing black magic, transformed herself and her group of sorceresses into Sangat that spread the divine word. Today, Sikhs remember the women teachers, warriors, mothers, and martyrs throughout their history and stand as one against sexism. I think the story of Noor Shah is really important because, again, a lot of women were seen as having this, in South Asian history, this magical, but in an evil way, quality. And that's actually not just South Asian history, it's global history. There's this idea that witches are something to be feared, something scary, something anti-religious, something anti-piety. But here, Guru Nanak Sahib still freely engages with this woman. He's not stopped by these societal taboos, and they become each other's sangat. So I think it's a very powerful story. And I think that if people want to read more stories like this, I really recommend Guru Nanak Chamatkar, which has a lot of, I think, the lesser known Sakis embedded in it. And there's a lot of stories with women that just, unfortunately, aren't as often found in the kind of day-to-day Sikh knowledge that we tend to transmit in our families and such. Women hold the same status of martyrdom when they lay down their lives for the cause of justice, for the Sikh Panth, and that's very important too. I mean, there are a lot of religions and cultures that have a notion of martyrdom, and very few acknowledge women as freely as they do men when they sacrifice their lives. And we must stand as one against sexism. So being an actor of sexism is as harmful to you as it is to the people you are oppressing. It is not in the way of Ikankar to be engaging in sexist behavior. And, true liberation happens when we act together. So I don't just want to talk about women as a group. I also want to talk about the feminine and the relationship Gurbani has to gender on a more general level. So this is from an essay by Nikki Guninder Kaur Singh, Remembering the Body of the Transcendent One. And the overarching theme here, which was also in the reading by her that I assigned for today, is that contrary to popular misinterpretations, the one, Ek Onkar, Vaheguru, is not a man, is not inherently male, is not a he, not a God, not a Lord. So, but that's not the only kind of liberation from rigid ideals of gender that occur in the Sikh faith and within the Guru Granth Sahib. Another aspect of this reconfiguration of gendered expectations is that the gurus themselves frequently adopt the feminine voice in their revelations about the divine. So they identify themselves as being feminine in nature when expressing certain thoughts and ideas. So Nikki Guninder Kaur Singh explains that the Sikh gurus continuously perceive and conceive that one in both male and female configurations. They express their intimate and passionate experience of the divine as father, mother, brother, sister, friend, lover, beloved, water, earth, skies, bumblebee, ocean, drop. And all of these things are found within one another. The ocean is found in the drop, and the drop is found in the ocean. Their expression, the revelation of that one, is the feminine Bani. In her, we have a total fusion of content and form. For the very utterances of the gurus manifest the transcendent one. Thus, the subject is not apart from the language. So to explain this in more simple terms, so there is no division between creator and creation. If the entirety of creation is the creator, and if the vastness of the creator lies within each of us as creation, this means that it is limiting and not enough just to say that the one, Ek Onkar, is both male and female and contains elements of the masculine and the feminine. One has to then acknowledge the inverse, which is that the masculine and the feminine lie within us as well. Each of us can access masculine and feminine modes of engagement, of being, of thought. And so to do that, because in general society, the Sikh gurus identified themselves as men, this means that they showed and exhibited this paradigm by accessing the feminine and expressing that through feminine grammar and the feminine voice. So this is something that can't quite be done in English because we don't have that sort of self-identifying masculine or feminine voice, but it can be done in the languages of the Guru Granth Sahib for the most part. Actually, Persian is entirely gender neutral. Even when you're talking about third-person people, there's no he or she. But again, this is something that comes up throughout Gurbani, and it's to say, I'm bringing that quality out in myself too. And there's a lot of references to what it means to engage with the feminine, not just within self, but in society as well. There are calls to, if you're pondering this question, you should sit with the feminine ones and discuss with them to find the answer. There And, there is talk of one's own feminine qualities, as well as which was expounded upon quite a bit in the reading for today, calling out the feminine divine manifestation. So the divine as a mother, the divine as all sorts of depictions of being a woman, having this maternal relationship. Unfortunately, this becomes very poorly reflected in mainstream English translations of Gurbani. The feminine voice is not highlighted. The one is portrayed as inherently male, masculine. He, him pronouns are assigned throughout. And as Nikki Guninder Kaur speaks, the references to femininity become kind of detached and abstract and a little strange. So oftentimes, for example, in Gurbani, we are to, the gurus speak as they are, as brides that are in utter devotion to their groom. So this does not mean that the one is inherently a man, nor does this mean that there's a command to be utterly devoted to grooms as a societal construct, because to say that as the command goes against the Sikh paradigm. I mean, first of all, the only servitude that exists in the Sikh paradigm is servitude toward the one, toward the divine, toward the guru. You don't have servitude to your fellow human beings, and also love and devotion is one that has to come from a true feeling and true eternal principle. So you can't just tell everyone, oh, you must be devoted to your groom first and ask questions later. So that's not what's going on, what is going on there either. And then references to bride become this strange thing in many English translations called a soul bride. Nikki Guninder Kaur deconstructs the term soul bride pretty well in her writings. I, to this day, cannot explain to you what it means. But basically, what she says is there is a fear of putting the feminine out there in very tangible and real, accessible terms, and there's this tendency to try to add a layer of abstraction when it comes to feminine references. So instead of saying, feel like the bride, be the bride, there's this weird ghost-like notion of a soul bride. Whereas the references to maleness and male figures stay very concrete in these English translations. So this is a very complex exploration of gender. Gender is an exploration in Sikhi. It's and there are so many ways to engage with our gender and to think about how our gender informs our interactions with each other, our feelings of love and connection, our interactions with the divine, so on and so forth. I am also going to read the rest of the Sabad about Sutak, since I read the first section. So if you did look at the readings, this Sabad that was assigned for the handouts is from the 18th Pauri of Asa Kiva, and each Pauri is accompanied by 3 saloks. So the saloks serve as the supporting arguments, and they use satire to form rational arguments that dismantle the so-called logics and traditional beliefs of Sutak. So we left off at, how can we avoid pollution that's already entered the kitchen? So Guru Nanak Sahib goes on to talk about what Sutak really is. What are actual examples of impurity? So with the so-called notion of Sutak, it's to say you should strictly avoid this impurity. So Guru Nanak Sahib says, okay, I've talked about this so-called impurity, but let's talk about some other things that are on my mind that are impure. Sutak of mind is greed, and sutak of tongue is lie. Sutak of eyes is to look at the beauty of another's wife and another's money. Sutak of the ears enters the ear when they listen to gossip. Nanak, because of these sutaks, swan-like humans, being bound, go to hell. All the sutak is illusion, under which an individual forsakes the one and attaches to the other. Birth and death are under the command. In accordance with the will of Ikonkar, one comes and goes. For this reason, eating and drinking during anyone's birth and death is sacred, since that Ikonkar's own self has given sustenance. Nanak, those who have understood this mystery through the Guru, they do not have the illusion of sutak. The true Guru ought to be praised greatly, in whom are immense greatness. When the owner united the beings with the true Guru, then these greatnesses of the true Guru become visible. When that true Guru willed, then the true Guru made those greatnesses dwell in the heart of those beings. The true Guru, having placed a hand on the forehead and having manifest the command, drove out vices from within, having killed them. By virtue of the owner being pleased, those beings received 9 treasures. So Guru Nanak Sahib, in essence, is saying society focuses on the wrong so-called sutak. We are surrounded by impure modes of being that are choices that we can eradicate and cleanse from how we engage and how we act, and we can reorient ourselves in a way that we become aligned with the Ikonkar paradigm. We please that one owner, that one master, the only owner and master that exists, that is true in form, that we owe any servitude to. So the wonderful Sundar Singh of Sikhi said in our Gurbani 101 class that, Gurbani is clear. These metaphors of Ikonkar taking the form in particular Sabad of a man is to say that there is one man that you can submit to. That is the man that is a manifestation of Ikonkar. So Ikonkar, if it is helpful for you as someone living in a society where men have said they are owed submission, it's helpful for you to imagine Ikonkar as a man. That is the man that you can submit to. But there is no submitting to these lowercase m men around in society. The feminine is, however, in Gurbani, held in such a regard and esteem, and is the door to liberation, such that a submission to the feminine actually does liberate. So, small quip, if you want to submit to a woman, that is up to you. So yes, this is, Guru Nanak Sahib is taking an essentialist view of what is pure and impure and abolishes it, and says we cannot have these essentialist views. Instead, we should look for purity and impurity in our actions and our choices. And the end result, the one who has rid themselves of these sutaks, is a reality that's available to all. Women, as much as men, can arrive at this point because these are ills and plagues that affect all of us. We all can fall into tempting actions of falsehood. We can all fall into the trap of slandering others, of feeling attached to fleeting, unsatisfactory, and illusory things in life, such as aspirations of wealth, or trying, he talks about trying to go after someone else's partner, someone else's relationship. So this is, again, it's a reorientation. It's not only a condemnation of an oppressive practice, it's the complete dismantling, rebuilding, and reorienting of a new way to interact. And this is an Asakivar, so it is so central to how Sikhs actually live. This is to be recited in congregation every single morning. And this is, again, not something that's limited to any, it's not siloed off in one part of the Guru Granth Sahib. This is, again and again, we are reminded to rid ourselves of these limiting, essentialist, binary notions of gender. Neither a woman or a man, nor a bird. The true divine being is wise and beautiful. Within the male is the female, and male within the female. Realize this, O wise being. You yourself are the male, and yourself the female. This you, this yourself, is both a calling out to the one, to the creator, saying you yourself are the male and you yourself the female, and at the same time is simultaneously a call to those engaging with Gurbani and to Sikhs. You yourself, you, the person listening, are the male and yourself the female. You may live in society in a certain way, express yourself more often one way than another, but within you there is still an element of both masculine and feminine. That's not something that can be put into entirely one box or the other. And this is never just the abstract. It is something to be grappled with, to be thought about, and to be practiced. So, as we see the formulations of Sikh practice get built upon over time, it all connects back to this. There are not separate requirements for being a part of the Khalsa between men and women. There are no binary gender practices. There is no forbidding men cannot forbid women from engaging in certain ways. There is no forbidding or separating by gender. That is, if one does that, it is not flowing from the Ekankar paradigm. And this meant that the Sikh faith was revolutionary and overturned and dismantled a lot of the prevailing practices of the era, and today still stands strong in the face of many prevailing ideas about gender and the place of women specifically. So yes, we need to honor the women of our history, of which there are so many, both in the Guru period and beyond. And I do think that though the stories of women in Sikh history I think, need to receive more mainstream attention, I think we do a decent job as Sikhs of calling upon these women in history. I think where we fall short is remembering to honor the feminine and to honor women in today's lived experiences, and to hold women fighting against oppression in today's era with just the same regard as those who did so bravely in our history, even laying down their lives for the cause of freedom, of justice, and to protect the Sikh month. So I will leave this lecture at that. Going to give a little sneak preview of next week's session, and then we can go into Q&A. So the next session is going to be on prayer. This is a little different than, because the other sessions have kind of been about forms of oppressions. This is shifting gears a little bit here. But what does prayer look like in a faith that does not endorse ritual practice? First off, Guru Nanak Sahib talks so much about dismantling ritual, but there are Sikh forms of prayer. And how does Sikhi approach the practices of other faiths? What does it mean for the Guru Granth Sahib and Gurbani to make reference to the practices of other faiths, despite being the foundational charter of something new that stands on its own? So I did put the readings in the handouts. There is also a link in the PDF that you can click on, and you can listen to a podcast, which is me expanding upon the written form that's in the handout. So it's they're not the same, as in the text and the audio are different. The audio expands upon the text, but I think it's quite helpful in getting into the right mindset for the course. I think it might be interesting, and it might allow people to generate questions they have in advance of the session. So with that, I will move on to questions.
Lovely, as always, amazing. Thank you so much, Asha. But yeah, I would just encourage everyone tuning in today to drop any questions they may have into our chat box or into the Q&A field. We do have a question about last week's lesson on caste, so I'm happy to ask that and then perhaps move more into conversations around gender. But Surinder from Hawaii asks, they just wanted to go back to a caste question. Did Guru Nanak just integrate the 4 main castes or also the untouchable caste?
So this is a very good question. I completely understand where this is coming from. So both the, quote, bottom caste, the Shudras, and those that historically may not even have associations with being Shudra face untouchability. So there's no caste privilege that comes with being of the bottom caste. However, there are people who also suffer from untouchability who don't even have any historical association with that group. But the principles of untouchability, well, fake principles, but the so-called principles of untouchability stem from the way historic religious doctrine and text demanded that people interact with the Shudras. So a Shudra should not be, if a Shudra hears the recited word of the Vedas, they should have their ear cut off, for example, which is horrifying. So that's why on that chart that I showed you, what I liked about it is that it classed Dalits, or those who are untouchable, who are outside of the 4 castes at all, as various groups that were pushed into a form of bondage and labor that was dictated by their untouchability. So it's not that there's 4 castes sitting on top of another thing. It's really, there's really no, it is the foundation of how untouchability functions is from these notions of how the top 3 castes are to treat others. There is, of course, within communities that face untouchability, different arguments well, some people may have a little bit of privilege over others, but that's not for me to say. And it's really something like, it's an intra-community dialogue. But yeah, I think oftentimes the kind of system gets portrayed as there being 4 castes on top of people who face untouchability, but that's a little bit of a misnomer, because there is, even the Shudra who are at that bottom tier are not considered fully, they're considered untouchable, and they're not considered, full humans that are capable of accessing the divine. So they were not, for example, given the opportunity to go through a Janeo ceremony. They can't attain liberation or salvation, and also neither can women.
Thank you, Asha. If there are no questions internally or from attendees, I'm happy to ask some questions that I also have. So kind of maybe a juvenile question, but something I like to ask. And I know you shared a little bit about it, but could you perhaps share a woman or women in Sikh history whose story has particularly influenced you, or one that's particularly inspirational? I would love to have like a historical example.
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, yeah, picking one is this is so I can also drop a fun fact into the mix. But Mata Kiwi is one of the only people that is referenced by name in the Guru Granth Sahib, and I find her commitment to the institutionalization of langar really incredible and really powerful. And I find, langar is an institution that's very important to me. So I know it's not really a challenge, but I challenge everyone to go read about what it says in Gurbani about Mata Kiwi, because I think it's really important to see how, very few people were given the honor of being named in the Guru Granth Sahib. And I think that something that I've always held near and dear about Sikhi is that we don't see the wives of the gurus as some sort of just like appendage. Their stories are just as important, and their contributions lead to the creation of our institutions to the same degree. So just by being the wife of Guru Angad Sahib does not make you, secondary to Guru Angad Sahib. So anyways, that's something that I would leave everyone with. And I think that it's very unique in our history that the wives of our gurus are just as much leaders of the faith.
Thank you, Asha. I also just have one last question, kind of a frequently asked question, I'm sure, but I'd love for you to address it. Kind of the divergence between Sikhi in the text and lived Sikhi. So yeah, if you could speak a little bit to that, because I know we spent this hour speaking about how women are the door to liberation, but obviously this isn't what happens in practice. So yeah, perhaps speaking to the gap between text and practice would be helpful.
Oh yeah, this is a tough one, as you know. Sikhi also was very firm on speaking out against female infanticide and femicide, and unfortunately, we struggle a lot with that in the Sikh community. And Punjab has horrifying rates of female infanticide and femicide. I think this is a testament to how devastating it is to lose touch with the original source of Sikhi and to lose touch with Gurbani. I think it shows that it's not just for intellectual or aesthetic fulfillment that we work so hard to try to reaffirm translations of the Guru Granth Sahib that are true to the Ik Onkar paradigm and true to its essence, because mistranslations can become incredibly harmful in ways that's almost unbelievable. Nikki Guninder Kaur writes about how domestic abuse gets reified and justified through horrid mistranslations of what it means to be devoted to, quote, the groom in Gurbani. So I think that that is something, and we also need to be aware of our own history as well. You know, we don't actually sit men and women in the Gurdwara because of anything to be found within the Sikh faith. These are outside influences that have come in. And outside influences of women being impure have come in, of sutak. Women being not allowed to do certain forms of seva or perform certain actions in a Gurdwara. This again, these are outside influences that we have let shaped our history. And I say we have let because I really think that it is on us to stand firm. You know, just like the Gurus stood firm in their stance and their ideology, we need to stand firm as well. And I know it's not easy, that we're usually the minority in any larger society, but it's on us. So I really do think this is something that we need to take more seriously. And you know, the patriarchy is strong. It's so universal at this point that even cultures and religions that have been so firmly affirming of women and the feminine have really had their practices crumble in the face of this form of oppression. So anytime you see a justification for sexism in the Sikh community or through Sikhi, investigate it. And it all starts in the home. It really starts with how we talk about these things in our own families, and we address unjust standards.
Thank you. Yes, the patriarchy is strong. We do have 2 more questions that are that I think I can throw at you together before we wrap up. But Gurpreet from Hamilton asks, while the practice of sati was criticized and women gained equality in status, was there ever any criticism against child marriage by the Gurus? And the second question is there anything about women wearing turbans like the American Sikhs do in Indian Sikh culture?
On the issue of child marriage, I don't know specifically what is said about age regarding marriage, and I'm not sure if anything specifically is said about age. However, child marriage would still be a fallacy in light of the Sikh paradigm, because marriage is something that is to be actively engaged in and sought. And it is, it's something that two people choose to enter to, merge themselves as one. And, that is not the context for how child marriages play out. There cannot be any coercion in a truly Sikh marriage. So it would still definitely be condemned in light of the Sikh paradigm. However, I'm not sure if anything specific is said about age at all. So I may be wrong on that, but I don't know if the Guru said anything on that specifically. Then as far as women wearing the dastar, so in the Sikh paradigm, there's no gendered difference in how those that become anointed in the Khalsa should dress or represent themselves. So it's actually a function of kind of our own culture that we've created. Like, okay, this is what, well, Sikh women should dress this way to remain feminine, and because we think of it as, oftentimes their societies think of the dastar as inherently masculine, it becomes less common for women to wear the dastar. So this binary of masculine and feminine appearance, is again a falsehood. This doesn't mean you cannot be masculine or feminine while wearing your dastar, or you can't express yourself in other ways, but this idea that the dastar is reserved for masculine identifying people is again a function of culture that has kind of created this binary that was not what was put in place by Guru Gobind Singh.
Thank you, Asha. Thank you for this another lovely class. Thank you everyone for participating and for your questions. Please note, as always, that a recording of this live class will be available within 24 hours, and please tune in next week for the 11th week of this live course. Before we end today's webinar, I would also, as always, like to remind you that we do host bi-weekly live webinars. Our next one is this Sunday, August 1st, Pakistan, the Sikhs and their heritage. We will be joined by Amardeep Singh, Dr. Zalveer Singh Pannu, and Dr. Nadra Khan in a conversation around heritage. And lastly, don't forget to tune into the Sikh Cast, a podcast produced by Sikhi, where we explore the various issues and events affecting Sikhs worldwide. Thank you for joining in. Today's live class will be ending now. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa,
Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.